I'm Beth English, and I am your instructor. I began my 911 career as a police dispatcher 35 years ago, and I've served as a communications director, higher ground capture 911 trainer for commercial electronics, and I am currently the program manager for the Idaho Public Safety Communications Commission. I have my master's telecommunicator license from Texas. I'm a TCOL instructor and a past president of Texas NENA. So let's get started with our session. Today's objectives. We are going to talk about and identify the types of toxic employees. We're going to identify ways of dealing with toxic employees. We're going to identify types of toxic bosses, because employees are not the only ones who are toxic. And then we're going to identify ways of protecting ourselves from toxic bosses. Now, toxic employees come in all forms, okay? You've got the gossip, you've got the bully, you've got the slacker, and they're all destructive to your agency and distracting to your other employees. They're like a cancer seeping into the corners of the workplace. They destroy morale. They just sap the energy from their coworkers, and they poison everything and everyone. So let's face it, we have all worked with a toxic employee at one time or another, and we've all been a toxic employee at one time or another. We've all felt the dread of going to work because of the issues brought up by those toxic employees. When you walk in the door and the atmosphere is so thick, you could cut it with a butter knife because of those toxic employees who are there. A lot of times, those toxic employees are the best dispatchers, but are they worth it? A lot of times we end up keeping them as employees because, frankly, we can't afford to lose anyone else. Everybody's in the same boat. Everybody's shorthanded, some more than others. I mean, I've read of agencies that were, upwards of 60% down. So, you can't afford to get rid of anybody, especially anybody that can actually do the job. And that just makes it worse because they know that we can't get rid of them. So how do we manage these people? Can they be managed, or do we even want to manage them? Now, as children, we're all taught everything we need to know in kindergarten. Get along with others, play nice, share our toys, and help others. So somewhere along the way, we've lost that. As adults, we have trouble getting along, and we have toxic workplaces. And why is that? Well, one reason is that we just don't have a clearly defined definition of what our agency culture should look like. We hire employees, we throw them in the ring, and then we let the culture develop on its own because we've already moved on to trying to hire the next person and fill that next empty slot. So we allow negativity to become the norm. We're so desperate to fill those empty positions that we hire someone who can do the job without even looking at how they're going to fit in with the team. We ignore warning signs, just because we need to get that position filled. And it does more harm than good, because those new employees may be the ones who bring in the toxicity into the agency. Take one employee who was hired from another agency. She had been let go when the new administration took over, which is normal. I mean, that happens. And when she was interviewed, she mentioned several times that she was old. Now, she was very polite. And, through the interview, she was like, yes, ma'am, no, ma'am. And so, and she mentioned that she hated drama. and she didn't put up with drama at her agency where she had been a supervisor before. And so the warning signs that were there were ignored basically, and she was hired. And within 6 months, she had turned that center upside down and had all the employees pitted against each other. Now, she was eventually terminated for inappropriate emails to another employee while she was on duty. And then after that, she filed an EEOC complaint for age discrimination. So, it's easy to spot the behaviors that are blatantly unacceptable, such as, sexual harassment or theft. But, behaviors that make our centers toxic are more subtle, and they can be harder to identify and correct. And so with this kind of employee, it's imperative that you begin documentation immediately. When you notice something wrong, you have to begin the documentation immediately to make sure that you CYA cover your agency. So when you look at the behaviors that are blatantly unacceptable and things like that, that's what you do immediately. You start documenting. But it's when the little things happen that you're like, okay, well, that was just one little thing. And then another little thing happens, and you're like, well, okay, that's something completely different. It's not, it's not uh, part of what she did before. But that's where we go wrong. You don't want to think like that. If you've got somebody that's starting to do things, then yes, you want to make sure that that person that you start documenting, and make sure that they know that it's being documented. And you're basically, what you're doing is you're looking for a pattern of behavior. Now, let's see, do I have this in here? I think I do. Let's see if I have a poll in here. Yes, we do. Okay, we're going to do a poll real quick. And so I want to know, have you ever worked with a toxic employee? Yeah, yes. Okay, so I don't see anybody that can say no. So apparently, we have all worked. Oops, somebody said no, they've never worked with a toxic employee. You need to pat yourself on the back and count yourself extremely lucky. Okay. All right, let's move on. So let's talk about the different types of toxic employees and what we can do about them. Okay, so one of our toxic employees is a gossip. And gossip is anything from truth to rumors to just blatant lies. Sometimes, gossip can serve a useful purpose in building trust and group bonding. Usually, though, it's generally going to be spread behind the back of the person the gossip is about. And most times it's done in a mean spirit. Now, sometimes it's intended to be funny, like, hey, did you hear how John pronounced Boisdiark instead of Bodark? But more often it's just mean, and it's done with the intention of maligning someone, causing them problems, or ruining their career. So, take for instance the employee who would call the spouses of people that she worked with and tell them that their spouse was sleeping with someone at work. And if she was questioned about it, then she would say that she had done it out of concern for the wife, because she needed to know. Well, depending on the circumstances, some people lost their jobs, some lost their careers, and some lost their families. So, then you've got the gossip who knows everything about everyone. He knows where everyone lives, everyone's spouse and children, who got terminated, and all the details as to why, even though admin is saying, well, we're not talking about it, but he knows all the details. He has all the officers personal cell phones in his contact list. And because he knows everything about everyone, he likes to throw out little, bits of information here and there to his coworkers. And then when someone gets angry about it, he says, "Oh, I was just joking." He'll say, "I love you and I'd never talk bad about you." Well, that's not true. Um, and then there's, the employee who needs to feel better about herself. So she talks about everyone else and about how they don't know what they're doing. She makes sure that all the other employees, both in the communication center and the ones on patrol, know that she's the only one who really knows how to do the job, when she actually makes more mistakes than anybody else, but she knows how to correct them and cover up the mistakes that she makes. Um, and because, she's telling everyone that she's the only one that knows how to do her job the right way, um, all of these people on patrol call her to do everything, to run anything, to put together an arrest packet, whatever it takes. Um, she's the only one that they'll talk to. Now, other employees like to talk about how bad others are to work with. And, I had this experience when I first started my career. One of the dispatchers on midnights would tell me, every night he would talk about how difficult the day shift supervisor was, and how difficult she was to get along with. And if she didn't like you, then she was going to get rid of you. And this is all I heard for the first 6 weeks that I was on the job. And so by the time I went to the day shift, I was scared to death of this supervisor. Now, there was another trainee who was hired at the same time I was, who was so scared by what she heard that she quit before she ever got to day shift. Now, each of these employees had one thing in common. They caused dissension and low morale, the two things that you try to keep out of your center. So, can you do anything with these employees? How do you deal with them? Well, a lot of times gossip starts because someone's bored or dissatisfied with their work situation. So, if you stop and think about it, the worst gossipers, like I said, are usually the best dispatchers. So it stands to reason that that they're bored because the job is so easy for them. And some of them just want to be seen as, more powerful, more in the know, better than others. Um, but something else that you should consider is if their behavior is because of a lack of policies, clear directions, or expectations. So you have to set the ground rules and be very clear about what you consider to be appropriate behavior. So you have to specify that appropriate behavior. Um, and then you need to make sure that everybody understands that this other behavior, gossiping, being rude to others, things like that, are not going to be tolerated. And then, you might provide some redirection. So if you're sitting working a station and somebody starts gossiping about something, this is where you would want to provide redirection. Change the subject. Give them a task to do. Ask them to go, um, can they finish those all encompassing wonderful validations? Is that something that they could do? Could they rearrange the wanted files? I mean, anything. Give them a task or send them on a break. Tell them, oh, look, it's your break time. It's time for you to go, um, you know, go on your break, go enjoy it. Take a minute and rest up a little bit. So now let's do another poll. Okay. Does your agency have clear policies about gossiping? Okay, about half and half. Ooh, more, more say yes. Okay, and that's good when you have clear policies about gossiping. Not only does it tell them what they need to know um, as far as how their behavior, what they're expected to do, and how they're expected to behave, but it also gives you guidelines for when you need to start doing the documentation to CYA. Okay, very good. All right, am I showing y'all the right screen? Oops, sorry, y'all, didn't mean to do that. Okay, there we go. Okay. All right. Um, can you terminate a gossip? Yes, you can. Um, now, you have different types of employers. You have what's known as at will employers, which means they can terminate anybody for any reason. They don't even have to have a reason, they can just do it. Um, I have worked for at will agencies, and frankly, I have never seen that. I've never seen us be able to terminate anyone just because. Um, Everyone that's ever been terminated had mounds of documentation, and that was the only way it was allowed to be done. So, also, whether you're union or civil service, there are specific steps that you have to take to terminate someone. So, but it can happen. Um, and then, the thing about gossiping is that it happens in bits and pieces. I mean, it's never going to be one big thing that you're going to be able to say, oh wow, um, look what happened here. It's going to be little things that happen, um, that something, um, you know something a little over here, you document it, and then something over here, you document that. Um, so that's it's never going to be any one big thing. So what you have to do is you have to document all the small incidents. And so when you document all the small incidents that you are made aware of, um, and you bring those out to the person who does the gossiping, um, it it lets them know, number one, that and that you're documenting this, but it also lets you keep track of a pattern of behavior. And that's something, because if you don't have a big one thing that happens, um, then you can't prove, okay, well, they did this one thing and they need to go, but you can prove that this is a pattern of behavior that's happening on a regular basis. So, um, you know, that's one way to make sure that you take care of what's going on. Um, so you need to, like I said, you need to document the small incidents as they happen, the result of the incident, and then each conversation you have with the employee about the behavior. And so going through the process of this is what's known as progressive discipline will cover you, whether you're an at will employer, whether you're unionized, or your civil service. Okay, now let's look at the bully. Okay. Um, it might help if we look at why people bully to begin with. Okay. Bullies like to pick on people who appear weaker than they are and who don't have a lot of confidence. They like the feeling of control they get with their bullying. It's a way for them to appear to be better than their coworkers. A lot of times they're jealous of those who can do the job as well, if not better than they can. And so rather than working harder to get the skills of their coworker, they would rather bring the coworker down to a point lower than themselves. They may prefer to work with someone who's more like them, so they bully the coworker who isn't. And then some bullies just like to stir up dissension and then sit back and watch the workplace culture circle the drain. And some just like to make life difficult for others. So, needless to say, a bully is toxic to the agency, and you may have even had to deal with one in the past. In one way or another, most of your toxic employees are also going to be bullies. Some of them are blatant about it. I mean, they don't care who sees it and who knows it, while others are a bit more subtle. In fact, as we discuss the tactics that bullies use, you will see that gossiping is a form of bullying. So let's look at some of the overt tactics used by bullies. They make false accusations. They accuse you of things you may or may not have done. Some bullies use anger to try to control others. If you were on the webinar last month, you might remember me telling you about an employee who came into my office and leaned over my desk while she threatened me. She regularly used anger to control others in the comm center. When you have a bully in charge, a lot of times they'll claim false policies to benefit themselves. I had a CTO at one agency that would make up random rules for the trainees to follow, even though she wouldn't follow them herself. A lot of times they'll single out a target and try to isolate them from others. They'll hold their target to a different standard. They'll criticize and bully them for their performance. And they'll spread false rumors about their target to ruin their reputation. Now, not all tactics used by bullies are as overt as these. They will do things that are extremely difficult to prove. So they will use body language to intimidate others. You may have seen someone who gets in other people's personal space trying to make them intimidated. Sometimes they'll use the silent treatment, and their goal in that is trying to cut their target off from the group. And sometimes they'll just disregard satisfactory work. One of the CTOs that I mentioned earlier had a certain order that she put paperwork in when she would, compile an arrest packet for an officer. And if her trainees didn't put the paperwork in that exact order, she told them it was incorrect. And then, of course, all of that went in the DORs. So all of these tactics cause toxicity in the agency. Employees dread coming to work, especially those who might be a target of the bully. And there could be more than one target. If the bully is left unchecked, then the bully can literally ruin the entire culture of an agency. Okay, so now let's talk about dealing with the bully. Okay. All right. Because bullying is often the result of jealousy or feelings of inferiority, one way you can deal with bullies is to meet the needs that they feel aren't being met. And this is extremely hard to do because basically, you're going to have to, offer praise for a job well done when really, you want to march them right out the back door, take away their keys and their access cards and march them out the back door. You can't do that. So what you do is you offer them praise for a job well done. And so in the hopes that that can offset their feelings of inferiority and lessen that jealousy that they feel for other employees. You can also provide them with more responsibility, like maybe maintenance of a database in CAD, or teaching, NCIC classes. Doing stuff like that can also give them that feeling of superiority that they're craving, but without them having to bully someone else to get it or affect the agency's culture. Now, if that doesn't work, then it's time to try a new tactic, because bullying is often done very subtly with little overt action. So the best way to manage the bully is to start by looking for, again, patterns of behavior or patterns of bullying. Now, you may not be able to physically observe what's happening, but you can observe the results of it. So, for example, let's say you hire 6 new people and you lose 4 of them within 6 months. They won't give an exit interview, and they list personal as their reason for leaving. This can be a red flag. Now, one agency had been through 17 trainees in a 2-year period, and the city manager felt that there were problems that were not being addressed. So she hired a new manager to try to get to the bottom of it. Well, within just a couple of months, the manager had discovered that trainees were being bullied, and it was being done in the open in front of other employees. But the other employees wouldn't admit to it. Trainees were being ridiculed for mistakes they were making, and basically being physically shoved back from the phone so their trainers could take over the phone calls. Now, once the issue was identified, the new manager started holding employees accountable for their actions. He had conversations with the trainers about the way they were treating the trainees, and he spelled out directly what his expectations were for future actions. Now, because bullies like to operate in a culture of silence and fear, they count on their targets remaining quiet about their behavior. So, which is exactly what happened. So the best way to deal with a bully is to bring their behavior out in the open and confront them about it. Now, when I say confront them, this isn't meant to imply that you need to call them out in front of others, but rather that you need to have a conversation with them. And as in any other conversation with an employee, it should never be one in which you would use personal pronouns such as you treat the trainees terribly when they make a mistake. Instead, you would try, let's talk about the proper way to address trainee mistakes. If the bullying involves ridiculing another employee, they may claim that they were only joking, like the one I was telling you about earlier. And so in this case, you should persist, because corrective action will only work if you're not giving in like the bully expects. You should also address the employee who you feel is being bullied. You need to discuss the situation with them and see if they would like for you to act as a mediator. Many times, the bullied employee won't want to address the situation themselves because of fear of retaliation. So regardless of whether the bullied employee decides to participate in a discussion or not, it should still be made clear to the bully that any retaliation will result in disciplinary action up to and including termination. Okay, so let's talk about our next one, the slacker. Now, the slacker only does what is absolutely necessary to get by on the job and nothing more. They come to work just on time. They answer the phone only when it becomes apparent no one else is going to. And they dispatch the calls without doing any extra investigation into vehicle descriptions, previous events, or calling the complainant back to verify information. They like to leave those little details up to everyone else. And then if there's downtime, well, they spend their time looking at magazines, surfing the internet, or, playing games, rather than working on validations or warrant audits or other things that could be done. When the shift is shorthanded, they don't volunteer to help with the overtime. They wait until they're directed to work. If a volunteer is needed for any extracurricular activities, such as like National Night Out or different little fairs and things like that might go on, they prefer not to participate, and they'll only do so if they're ordered to. They also they won't show up for mandated meetings, and generally won't participate in any kind of shift parties or get-togethers. They may also participate in some inappropriate activities while on duty. I had one that I had to talk to because she sat there and watched Dr. Pimple Popper all day, every day, when she wasn't actually answering a call or dispatching a call. So, that to me was not appropriate while on duty. They may also take, too many breaks, or they return late from breaks. Or when their relief comes in, they leave without even bothering to brief their relief. So slackers are considered toxic because of the extra workload that gets put on everyone else to make up for their slack. Other employees get frustrated and they get overwhelmed with always having to cover the work that the slacker should be doing. So not only does the extra work frustrate the other employees, but so does the lack of participation in shift get-togethers, things like that are meant to build rapport on the shift. So how do we deal with the slacker? Well, the first approach is to determine if there is some underlying reason for their lack of motivation. It could be a systemic problem rather than an individual one. There may be some hidden resentment behind their lack of interest. Find out if there's something going on in the agency that keeps them demotivated. If not, is there something in their personal life that's distracting them from their work? But once you determine that, then you can decide which direction to go with correction. So if there's nothing at work or in their personal life that's preventing them from performing their job satisfactorily, then it's time to tackle the problem of their slack. So you first need to establish the workload that is expected of everyone, including the slacker. Set clear expectations for them, and then schedule regular follow-up meetings with them to discuss their progress. It would also be a good idea to have some surprise visits to their shift to check on their progress and answer any questions they may have or to solve any roadblocks. And then you always want to remember to reward the employee for any progress made. Now, they may not be the top performer in your agency, but they are still susceptible to praise and the motivation that it can provide. Now, our next one is the hot mess. And this is exactly what the name implies. It is a hot mess. This employee may have been a stellar employee at one time, but is no longer. Basically, it's all they can do to get to work. They show up to work looking like they rolled out of bed and literally got in the car and came to work. They don't bother to comb their hair. Their clothes are wrinkled. You can tell they slept in them. And either they have on no makeup, or they're unshaven and just literally look like a hot mess. Sometimes they may have worked for the agency for several years, but they have absolutely no time left on the books. As soon as sick time or comp time or holiday or vacation is put on the books, they use it literally the minute they get it. You can pretty much count on them to call in sick on their Friday or their Monday. And then, of course, being sick on holidays are just a given. So what you do is you end up requiring them to have a doctor's note for any absence, which, of course, they will readily provide because, their best friend's husband is a doctor, or, their brother's cousin's dog is a doctor. So they can bring those notes anytime they want. They make a lot of mistakes in call sheets, and then they have to ask their supervisors to correct them. They can't remember from day to day how to perform tasks, everyday tasks that are they're constantly having to ask for help with. You end up listening to their calls because they're making so many mistakes, and you find yourself constantly documenting them. They're completely disorganized and seem to be helpless. They're usually whining about something, whether it's how bad they feel, how their children are misbehaving, or even how bad they look. Every day is a bad day, and they can't wait until it's their weekend again. Now, this person is toxic to your agency because of their constant helplessness, their constant mistakes, and their absenteeism, which, of course, everybody else is having to cover. So your other employees are having to cover for them whether they're at work or not. And their mistakes are making your agency look incompetent. And your other employees feel that. So how do we end up dealing with the hot mess? Okay, well, first, you have to determine what's making them that way. As always, find out if there's a problem at home, or is there something in the workplace that is causing the issues. If there are issues at work that are the cause, handle those issues. If the problems are stemming from something at home, offer them resources to work through those problems. Most everybody has an EAP, Employee Assistance Program, as part of their insurance. If yours does, offer to help the employee get some assistance through them, such as counseling. I believe on most EAP programs, you can go to 5 free sessions to a counselor. If that's not something that's available to them, do what you can to help them find a resource. You might also encourage a physical exam and possibly screening for ADD and related issues. But if the problem has nothing to do with issues at home or work, then you will have to approach it from a corrective action perspective. In this case, you would have documented absences, you would have documented mistakes and appearance, whether in your general documentation or in an annual evaluation. And you would have discussed each issue with the employee. If so, then it's time to introduce a performance improvement plan, or a PIP. So in this plan, you will specify each of the issues that you've documented and what policy, whether agency or city or county or whatever, has been violated, and what improvement you want to see in the future. You'll determine a time frame, such as 90 days, and schedule regular meetings to review progress. If they're needing extra training, find out when and how that training will be provided. Now, I do have a copy of the PIP that can be sent to you along with the recording of this webinar. So we will try to get that out with the webinar to you. You want to support your employee, but you also need to support the other employees who are not toxic to your agency. Okay, let's talk about the pessimist or the volcano. So the volcano is like a black cloud hanging over everyone's head at work. Their negativity permeates everything. So this is the person who does a good job, whether they're call taking or dispatching, but every radio transmission, every phone call is followed up with a language-filled rant about the caller, the officer, or the world in general. They get angry when an officer makes a request that they personally have deemed stupid, or when callers waste time on 911 with idiot calls. Regular tasks that need to be completed, such as the ever-loving validations, will cause a stream of language that would make a sailor blush, and that's before they find a mistake in an entry that has to be corrected. So should there be something crazy expected, oh my gosh, like a project, they erupt like Mount Vesuvius, and they criticize everyone, regardless of their position or level of intelligence. Their constant complaining, foul language, and their angry eruptions spread suspicion and doubt in everyone's mind, not to mention the fear of being the one to cause the eruption. So other employees kind of tiptoe around them, and then they get resentful because they have to tiptoe around them. So when you're dealing with them, we all have negative emotions at work from time to time. And we've probably all had choice words for a caller or a responder after hanging up or unkeying. The problem with the volcano is that they get so caught up in their negativity that they let it completely overtake them. So to deal with them, we've got to stop the volcano from staying in that habit of complaining and whining and blowing up and disagreeing with everything. Now, one agency had an employee who was so angry and so negative that other employees, were scared of her. And after one particularly bad rant, during which she slammed the phone down, she threw several items and swore so loud that a caller heard her over someone else's headset. She was ordered into anger management in order to keep her job. So you can imagine how scared the other employees must have been, to watch this kind of behavior. No one should have to be afraid at work, and having this kind of negativity, created a toxic and a hostile work environment. So another tactic to try with the volcano is to teach them how to give feedback. We've all heard of the sandwich method, in which you sandwich a criticism between two pieces of positive feedback. Teaching the pessimist or the volcano to use this method would temper their complaining and might make them see the good side of things rather than always seeing the bad side. And then you've got your knowledge hoarder. Okay. Some people believe that knowledge is power, and in some cases it is, but it's never a good idea to have just one person with all the knowledge. Many years ago, I worked for an agency in which the manager and his assistant were responsible for all the equipment in the center, including CAD, phones, radio, the recorder, everything. And those of us who worked the floor were given only the information about these systems to do our jobs and nothing more. So if we had a 911 call that had an incorrect alley, we were told what blanks to fill in on the reporting sheet, but not what any of those fields meant. So when we went to Enhanced 911, we were told that we would get the address of the caller with the new system, but that's all we were told. When CAD was upgraded, We were taught how to use the new tasks, but not how those tasks related to anything else in the system. Well, one day the manager turned in his retirement notice and he was gone immediately. About 2 days later, so was his assistant. And with those two resignations went all the knowledge about every system we had. Now, they had been so controlling with the information because they both believed that knowledge was power. Unfortunately, neither one of them was able to see beyond that to even imagine what would happen if that knowledge was gone. So we had to start from scratch, learning everything we could about all of it. Now, at the time, the manager's assistant had been in the middle of implementing phase 2 wireless. Well, we had not even heard about phase 1. So the reason you have knowledge hoarders is because they want to make sure that their jobs are secure. But in this case, not only was that attitude toxic, but it was also detrimental to the agency because it left an entire city's 911 system without any internal support should something go wrong. And you know you're working with a knowledge hoarder if they're not team players, if they have independent processes, and and if they have insecurities about work. So when you're dealing with the knowledge hoarder, if you find an employee who thinks knowledge is power and they appear to be hoarding knowledge, you might consider rewarding actions of those who share new knowledge with others. Praise that employee who offers to train existing employees with maybe that knowledge that not everyone has. And then you might also consider developing a knowledge database, sort of a book of knowledge for your agency. So if you find your employee doing things in systems that the others can't do, have them create a document with the instructions and save it to that database. Now, oops, sorry about that. Okay, now we've talked about the the toxic employees, but what about the toxic boss? So if you've ever worked for a toxic boss, you're going to be able to relate to this. All right. So there's different types of toxic bosses. You've got the manipulator, who is generally charming and charismatic, and they use those skills to get their employees to do things they would rather not do. They'll give you tasks that you can't or don't want to do, and then once that task is done, they'll take credit for it, but if the task fails, they'll blame you for the misinformation you gave them. They'll take on tasks and projects that will bring them glory and recognition, but everything else will, as they say, roll downhill. They're masters at gaslighting, making you feel that you've misunderstood their directions, and that's why you didn't do the task correctly, even though you wrote down every word and stated your understanding of the task back to them. You got the egotist who knows everything, whether he does or not. That's a person who is usually knee deep in conversation. And he surrounds himself with others who believe exactly as he does, resulting in a small army of himself. He rules from his office, very rarely ventures out to check on the various divisions, not because he thinks they're running like a well-oiled machine, but because he doesn't think that they're important. When he issues orders and instructions, a lot of times he'll do so at the top of his lungs. I mean, after all, everyone needs to hear what he has to say, right? He'll engage in office favoritism, dispensing punishment unequally. And a lot of times he'll base those decisions on the things that he's heard while participating in office gossip. He doesn't sleep because he's often up in the middle of the night coming up with brilliant new plans for you to execute the next day. plans that are going to fail because he hasn't asked anyone involved for their input. You got the time sucker. And this person, they don't care if they're late. They're unconcerned with your personal or professional time, and they'll come to you at the last minute with a project that must be done right then. And then after you've spent most of your day working on the project, they tell you not to worry about it. It's not needed now. They also use your work time to discuss personal problems. They may come to you with a project, and then while discussing the project, they mention something personal. So, trying to be polite, you ask them a question about it, and the next thing you know, they're now spending 2 to 3 hours in your office daily talking about their personal issues. In the meantime, that state report that's due this afternoon just sits there as your time goes down the drain. And then, of course, let's not forget the mandatory meetings every single week that takes 2 to 3 hours. Meetings that really could have been handled by email. Then you've got the wannabe friends. Okay. Now, they're not as ruthless as some of the other toxic bosses, but they can still be demoralizing to work for. So they want to be your friend, and they will completely ignore professional boundaries and will immediately start asking personal questions right off the bat. A lot of times they can't establish those work boundaries, and you end up being in a friendship that you may not want, but you feel that you need to participate in to keep your job. You end up hearing lame, off-color jokes, and you may find yourself going to some strange places to eat and or hang out. You'd like to tell your boss they've crossed a line, but again, you don't dare because you need that job. And then you've got the micromanager. We've all worked for one of these before because they're the most common type of toxic boss in the workplace. Now, the micromanager watches everything you do and every step you take. Now, they may have trained you once upon a time, and they expect you to continue to do everything exactly the way they taught you. Remember the toxic trainer that I mentioned earlier who wanted trainees to put arrest paperwork in the same order she did? That's a micromanager. You may have heard me talk about a boss I had once who would have me write letters to the different phone companies, the CLECs, about contracts. And so I would write the letter, proud of my brilliant prose in expressing our need. And by the time she was finished rewording it, she might as well have written it herself. And I had just wasted my time. So what the micromanager says to themselves to justify their micromanaging is, it will save time if I just do it myself. What they mean is, I don't believe it's worth my time to let my employee try because they're not going to get it right anyway. They may say too much is at stake to allow it to go wrong. But what they're actually meaning is, I don't trust them to do their jobs according to my standards. And, it's my credibility on the line if we don't get it done on time. And what they actually mean is, the work won't get done unless I constantly prod them. They say, when I'm not involved, they mess up. What they mean is, the one time I yielded some control, there was a mistake, and I'm not willing to take that risk again. And then the last one, my boss wants me to be heavily involved in my team's work. What they really think is, if I don't stay involved, how else am I going to prove my worth? Okay. So, how do you cope with a toxic boss? Well, if any of these sound like your boss, you'll be relieved to know that it's not you, it's them. But what can you do about it? Okay. Well, your boss isn't going to change. They got to be that way for a reason, whether personal or business related, and they became toxic before you came along. Like the saying goes, you can't change someone else, you can only change your reaction to them. So let's look at how we're going to do that. Okay, you're going to protect yourself mentally. You're going to realize that you are not at fault and you are not alone. If you're feeling it, others are too. So talk to your friends, your support groups, or a counselor. It helps if you can find others who feel the same way. Protect yourself legally. We all tend to underestimate toxic bosses and how far they'll go until they go there. So don't let your guard down. Document everything: conversations, project assignments, discussions about pay, even time off requests. There's nothing too small to document. Make sure you've got dates and times, who else was present, and the location. And this is especially important when you're documenting any kind of harassment or hostile workplace. Relax in your time off. I know that we're all working overtime to cover shortages, especially now with the holidays coming up. But you need to take time to get away from stress, and a toxic workplace is stressful. Don't read work emails off duty if you can get away with it. Fill your time with things you like to do, things that will take your mind away from the toxicity. Start a new hobby or take a class completely unrelated to work. You can accept their behavior. This may be the hardest one to do because we all want to make the toxic people change, but thinking that's possible is even more stressing. Now, they may have a momentary lapse of reasoning and say something nice one day, leaving you thinking that maybe they've turned a corner. Don't fall for it. As hard as their toxicity is to deal with, it will be even harder if you let yourself think they've changed. Plus, the sooner you accept the way they are, the sooner you can plan strategies to move forward. And then don't blame them. Toxic people want one thing, and that's for their anger and frustration to be real. If you lash out at them, it justifies their actions and tells them they were right to treat you negatively. Don't give them the satisfaction. Just ride it out until one of you can leave. Now, your post-toxic life. The thing about working with toxic people is that you lose a part of yourself, your work self. You no longer love your job. It just becomes a chore you have to do. You drag yourself out of bed every day to go to a place that you don't want to be, to work with someone you don't like. So even if you leave that job, don't automatically go back to being your old self. You don't trust your new coworkers or your new boss, and where you might have been fun and outgoing before, you're now quiet, careful, and very watchful. The one thing you can find relief in is knowing that you now have a new experience, and that's dealing with a toxic person. It'll never be as bad as it was the first time because you have new skills now and you'll handle it in a different way. You are in control of your life, not the toxic people. So, um, join us next month, December 7th at 12 p.m. Central Daylight Time. I'm going to try to remember that I am in a different time zone and get this one started on time. But join us for Leading Through the Relationship Minefield, um, where we will talk about all the different relationships that we have working in a comm center and how we're going to work through those. So if you have any questions, go ahead and send those to me. And in the meantime, I will let you know that this training has been brought to you by Commercial Electronics. And if you need a certificate for continuing education credit, you can send an email to training@comelectronics.com. And then, like I said, the PIP, we will include that with the recording that that will go out to y'all. And again, I appreciate your patience as I got this thing started and working off of 3 different computers to get it going. So if you have any questions, send those to me. Otherwise, go forth and conquer and have a great day.